So the framework really gives people a place to start. A lot of times people are paralyzed or fear or anxious, worried, whatever the case may be, because they are so overwhelmed by all of the myriad of challenges that are hitting them all at once. And this Choose Better framework just gives people a roadmap to work through their thought process and come up with the best choice for that situation.
Talking with the experts.
Hello and welcome to Talking with the Experts. My name's Rose Davidson from rosedavidson.com, and Talking with the Experts is about all things business by business owners for business owners. And you can find it on all good podcast streaming platforms and on YouTube. And today my guest is Timothy Yen. And Timothy is a clinical psychologist with a doctorate from Azusa Pacific University, practicing in the East Bay area and leading conferences and retreats around the globe. Between his years in private practice and another 8 years as a mental health staff sergeant in the US Army, he's empowered hundreds of individuals, families, organisations and teams to develop authentic relationships and grow into their best selves. He currently resides in Northern California with his wife and his son, and he has a book. It's called Choose Better, the Optimal Decision-Making Framework. Good morning, Timothy, and welcome.
Good morning to you too, Rose. Thanks for having me on their show.
Yes, so tell me a little bit more about your book.
Sure. So this is the book, Choose Better, and it is about really working through a systematic way to arrive at the optimal decision for any challenge, any decision making that is required to navigate our daily lives. And my hope is that people are able to make confident, vibrant decisions and actions through this framework.
Yeah. So, obviously every business owner needs to navigate, a myriad of challenges to, make better decisions. And I know a lot of us as business owners make poor decisions. How does your framework help us through that?
So the framework really gives people a place to start. A lot of times people are paralyzed or fear or anxious, worried, whatever the case may be, because they are so overwhelmed by all of the myriad of challenges that are hitting them all at once. And this Choose Better framework just gives people a roadmap to work through their thought process and come up with the best choice for that situation.
Yeah. So how does the framework work? Do you want to give us a step-by-step sort of process? Don't have not in great detail because I want people to buy your book, obviously. But if you could just go over it a little bit, that would be great.
I would love to. So the framework is really made up of 4 parts, and each part will introduce a question. So the idea is when you're faced with a problem, challenge, situation, my hope is people will ask themselves these 4 questions. Part 1, or I call it pillars. The first pillar of the framework is your emotions or your feelings. So the question that you want to ask yourself is, what are my feelings trying to tell me? Or what are my emotions telling me? The reason why I start with emotions is because that is the quickest data point you're going to get when you're faced with an important decision. The more important the situation, the more intensely you'll feel. So I want that to be not a nuisance, not something to be pushed away or ignored, but it's actually a very important messenger. It's trying to tell you something is up, something is important. And simply by going through and identifying what those emotions are and the why behind the emotion, it gives you some really important data points to kind of think through your decision making. So that's pillar number 1. Pillar number 2 is values of self, meaning what is meaningful and important to me about this challenge? Like, what kind of outcomes do you want? What kind of what do you want to see happen? What is important to make sure that it's included in this discussion or challenge? So it really digs into your personhood. Everyone has different values. Not everyone weighs everything equally. So it's important to know who you are in order for you to know what you care about. And that takes a little bit of personal growth and development. Hopefully people, leaders, business leaders are asking those kind of questions as to what it is that they're trying to create, what kind of value they want to put out in the world. So that's pillar number 2, getting to the nitty-gritty on what is important to me about this challenge. And then we go to pillar number 3, which is values of others, meaning just because it's important to you doesn't mean that it's going to be important to the people involved. So you want to at least be mindful of creating win-win scenarios. I want to make sure that I get my needs met, but is there a way to make sure that my teammates, my customers, whoever you're interfacing with, can I make sure that they get a equal win for what's important to them too? So that's asking those kind of questions to make sure that it's inclusive and we're creating a mindful solution that's not just self-serving. And then we move to the last pillar, which is what I call reality factors. So what are things that are present in this scenario that I probably want to be mindful of? And the example I always use is gravity. So you may not believe in gravity, you may not understand gravity, you may not like gravity, but if you step off a high cliff with no parachute, then you will experience gravity in a very painful way. So there are certain things in our world that are not really up for discussion. They just exist. And that could be things like culture, of how people operate, how people think, certain norms. And it's important just to be aware that those things are also in place because there are consequences when you make certain decisions with those reality factors in place. And the hope is when someone goes through these 4 questions and they're kind of thinking it out, kind of jotting little notes down, there are going to be some options that will surface in that process. As you're gathering these data points, there's going to be a few options. They're not all going to be optimal, but there are going to be some options like I could scream at my boss. I could just not say anything. You can kind of work through the different options at your disposal. And then last check is you kind of check with your values of self again to make sure you're on the right track and you pick the best choice. Based on all those things that are considered, what is the optimal choice for this situation?
All right,
that's the framework.
Wow, that's very good framework too. I think it's something that we should be teaching our children, as a matter of fact.
I think so too. Hopefully we do it ourselves first before we teach it to our children.
Yeah,
yes.
Obviously, yes. But yeah, it's something that it should be taught to our children. And I think it should be something that is framed around the curriculum as well, because those things are quite important to society as a whole, not just in business.
Agreed. Absolutely.
So how could people, I guess, use those 4 pillars in a better way to, 1, better themselves, and 2, to better their business?
I would say that the beginning step is knowing the framework exists. And from there, being willing to pause, think, and work through these steps in a thorough way so that you are positioned in the best way possible, either in your personal life, in your business life. And the power of the framework is that when you make, and you kind of pull the trigger, so to speak, and you decide to really go through and make this decision, there is going to be this newfound confidence that people have because they know that they did the hard work. They knew that they thought it through. And is it a formula of 100% guaranteed success? No, because we're probably going to miss some data points. We're not all knowing. We may still make a not so great choice, but we know that in our heart of hearts, we did our due diligence in making this choice because it was well thought out. So that is the encouragement, is that when people use the framework, they will feel confident and they're able to take ownership and say, yes, I back this decision because I worked through it, and this is the best choice that I can come up with at this time.
Yeah, I agree. They're things that people can do to better their self-talk, their
Mhm.
mind shifts, their mindsets, and all those sorts of things. And the framework, I guess, would help with that in lots of ways, because you need to
Yes.
ask yourself those questions. In my mind, anyway, that's my thinking about hearing about the framework for the first time.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I love about the framework is that it's a skill. It's not just natural talent. Not some people have it, some people don't. This is something that everyone can improve on. It's not just for the chosen few. Everyone can get better at decision making when they're willing to work through their thought process, understand their emotions, identify values of others and themselves. It's something that everyone can improve on.
Absolutely, yeah, we can all do that. So I'm thinking that how can people use this, I guess, in a more authentic way? I mean, people paid lip service to this type of uh, advice. How can they
Mhm.
take it and be truthful and authentic about it?
What makes the framework somewhat unique to maybe other decision making models is that I front load it with your emotions. And there's nothing so raw and authentic as how you feel. When
Mhm.
you feel, it's hard to ignore like that. There is something visceral, even that you feel it in your body. You feel, especially if it's like anger or disappointment, frustration, you feel it. And that piece of it, not ignoring the feelings, but being able to identify what it is and why it's happening, already adds a element of authenticity because you are being honest with yourself. Because if you're not honest with yourself, it's really hard to be honest with other people. And this is true about the values as well. It's at least checking in with yourself on what's important, what's meaningful, and all those things. Again, a lot of it is internal. So it's hard to really like fact check if people are actually doing these things. But I guess it goes back to the fourth pillar, which is reality factors. Whether you do the work or not, the outcomes will tell the tale
Mm.
about whether or not this is something that is empowering. You feel good about this business choice that you made, the people that you decide to partner with, the kind of projects that you pursue. You might just going for something that, at least the statistics show, I can make a lot of money doing this. Or is this something that I actually believe in? Like it will actually help people. It's not a gimmick. It's something that I can really put my dollars and my time and my team's time into developing. Those are the kind of big questions I'm hoping business owners will ask themselves before they execute whatever plan that they may have.
Yeah, it's good advice as well, because a lot of people go in like a bull in a china shop and just go and make a decision and don't think about the outcome at the end. I mean, and a lot of people do it in their personal life as well. I know, from time to time I've done the same thing. I've gone head on into something, head first into a situation, and it doesn't end well because I haven't thought it
Same
out.
here, guilty. Yeah, guilty. I am in the same boat. It doesn't always work out either when we don't think it through.
No, and that's really important that we have to do that. So I guess, where can people find your book, Timothy?
They can find on Amazon or other booksellers, but they would just type "Choose Better" Timothy Yen or "Choose Better: The Optimal Decision Making Framework," and that is one place that they can find it. Or they can go on my website. I have a link there as well, timyen.com, where they can
Perfect.
buy the book. Yeah.
Oh, excellent stuff. So, any wise words to finish up today?
Wise words. There are two chapters in my book that are important to include in our discussion. So I talked about the four pillars, and that's the framework in and of itself. But I spent a lot of time on these last two chapters. One is about courage, which is just because you know better doesn't mean you always do better. So it's important for people to identify what are some barriers that prevent them from actually implementing the choice that they've discovered. And that is really important to enjoy the fruits of their optimal decision, because there's going to be fears and other doubts that creep in that keep people from being courageous and take a risk and do what they know is good for them. And then the last chapter, I talk about rebounding, which is sometimes we, despite our best intentions, we still make a crappy choice. We still don't feel good about what it is that we did, or there's things that we didn't know, but we know now that disaster has arisen. And what I would say to that is, just like this framework, choose better, can be learned from children to adults, or it's a human thing. People can learn to be better decision makers. We are always one step away from making a better choice. So it doesn't matter what kind of history you have. Maybe you have a terrible track record of making bad decisions, but it's never too late. People can always make a better decision. And it does matter. It really does matter to their own individual life, but also to the people that they impact, be it their team, their business, their customers. It's never too late to make a great choice.
Yeah, courage was a good word. Sometimes courage is you've got to pull it up from your bootlaces, basically, don't you?
Sure. Yeah, and sometimes we have to remember, why should I muster the courage and go through this painful discomfort to follow through on some of these decisions? Then it goes back to pillar number 2, which is your values. What are the things that really matter? What's really at stake here? Is it your integrity? Is it really being able to contribute in a way that's meaningful to you? And when we remind ourselves that this is what's at stake for my own family, for the lives of my children, for the customers, whoever it is that you are mustering this courage for, sometimes that will give us that little bit of extra energy to fuel the fire and pull the trigger, so to speak, in making the right choice.
Sometimes it's hard when things are, despite best efforts, and you've made what you believe to be the right choices, and you've asked yourself all the right questions, and it still fails. How do you get around that?
Yeah, well, I do address that in that book, in my book, which is, it's really important for people to sit with some of those feelings of disappointment, of discouragement. Most people try to run from them. In fact, some people are so scared to take a risk and make a choice because they don't want to end up feeling disappointed. People are so definitely afraid of disappointment and failure. And I don't blame them. They're not my favorite set of feelings, if I could choose. However, it's so important that people honor those feelings because they're real, right? If we're talking about authenticity, like, hey, you had an expectation and it did not pan out the way you wanted it to. Despite your really, really good intentions, it didn't pan out the way you wanted. It's okay to feel sad. Like, it's okay to feel mad. It's okay to be disappointed. But after you allow yourself to feel whatever you feel, my hope is that people at least honor their intentions, especially if they went through the framework. I mean, there's not much more you can do in terms of thinking through all the data points to a situation. So honoring your intentions is so important to be able to talk to yourself and say, hey, well, I didn't mean well. There's some things that I missed, so it didn't turn out well, but I do want to at least honor my good intentions. And then the big walkaway or takeaway is, well, what can I learn? Why did it not turn out the way that I wanted it to? What kind of modifications? What do I need to tinker with so that my next choice will be better than my last choice? And in my opinion, that wasn't a wasted experience, because for many people, they wouldn't be able to arrive at where they're at now if they did not go through some of the painful experiences of decisions we've made despite our best efforts. We needed to go through that process. There's no shortcuts. I would say in business, that's really true. Like you only know what you know, and then there's the market. There's all these other variables that contribute to a successful business. You can only do what you know. Like you can't do or act upon things you don't. And so there is a level of trial and error people need to go through in order to arrive at where they're at. And if you name any business, some of the big ones are like Apple, Microsoft, Facebook, like some of these huge businesses, household names, I'm sure they didn't become this empire that they are overnight. They've tried things, they probably lost tons of money doing something that they thought was going to work and it didn't work. But the big thing in common, the grand denominator is none of them gave up. They held on to the vision of what they value as a company, and they got back up and kept going for it.
Yeah. So what would you advise people when the lizard brain decides it wants to rear its ugly head?
I like that you know the term lizard brain. That's a very somewhat psychological term. It's the brain stem, right? It's that part of our brain that is instinctual. It just kind of, right? It just kind of does whatever it does when fear, anger strikes.
Fight or flight. Yeah, the fight or
flight. That's it. That's it. That's the lizard brain for people who don't know. They're like, what? What is a lizard brain? Yes, that's what you're referring to. A big part of mastering your life is knowing how to master that lizard brain. That's a big part of the personal growth journey, and knowing what things triggered the lizard brain. And it's going to be different for everyone. Some people are like, it doesn't bother me, it doesn't freak me out. But then the prospects of losing all your money or the prospects of social disapproval, we all have different unique subsets of fears, and that's usually what kicks us into the survival mode, what you have accurately defined as fight or flight. Like that is a part of us that's wired. And my hope is that we have a prefrontal cortex, a different part of our brain that will trump the lizard brain, so to speak. The framework, just by going through the framework, you're freaking out, you want to do all these things, and you're like, all right, how am I feeling? How am I feeling? Why am I feeling this way? You're already engaging in the prefrontal cortex. You're already working through the lizard brain rather than letting the lizard brain do all the driving. So the framework is actually a solution to the lizard brain, because your next step. Your next step is articulate how you feel and why you're feeling that way. Follow the framework, and that will move you out of the lizard brain into true choice.
I'm glad you put those two together, because I was going to. That was my next question. But thank you for that. So, do you have checklists as far as going through each of the pillars?
Is there a checklist? I think that is the checklist. It's each of those questions is the checklist.
Yeah.
What are my feelings telling me? What's meaningful, important to me? What's meaningful, important to other people? What are reality factors that I want to consider? That is the checklist. If you can ask those 4 questions and gather data points while you're answering them, you're in pretty good shape. I would say you're like 80, 90% there in terms of the framework.
Absolutely perfect. That's answered, I think, everyone's question, because a lot of books have little checklists under each of the chapters or under each of the pillars, and follow this rule. But you've set it out really well, so that you don't need to read a whole chapter to find out what you need to do. You just look at the questions, and you've got your tick boxes there.
That's it. I actually created a acronym because psychologists love acronyms. So I was like, how do I piece together a cute little acronym that people can follow? And the best one I could come up with was E-sort, kind of like email, right? But E-sort, like sorting out your thoughts. So E is emotions, right? S is self-values. O is other values. R is reality factors. And then T, I had to kind of bend this one. T is tenacity, which is the courage to follow through. So that's another little checkbox. If you want to use eSort as a way to think through each question, hopefully that will help people remember the framework.
Perfect. All right, Timothy, thank you so much for your time today. I've really enjoyed the conversation. It's people, please go to timyen.com to find his book, because I'm sure we could all better our lives, our businesses, through reading his pillars. And we all need to ask ourselves those 4 questions. So thank you again, and have a great day.
Thank you so much, Rose, for having me on your show.
Bye for now.